All right, let's dive into it. Every earnings call really tells a story. And for CMS Infosystems this quarter, that story was about facing a perfect storm of challenges, but also about laying out a surprisingly clear plan to navigate right through it. So let's break down what actually happened and maybe more importantly, what comes next. So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get into the tough numbers that kind of set off the alarm bells. Then we're going to dissect that perfect storm and figure out what caused all the trouble. After that, we'll listen in on the tough questions analysts were asking management. Then we'll shift gears and look at the company's three-pillar comeback strategy. And finally, we'll wrap it up by weighing the risks that are still very much on the table. Okay, so first up, the quarter itself. Let's be honest, it was a tough one. The numbers really tell a story of some serious challenges, especially when you see the drop-off from Q1.
Just take a look at this side by side. The revenue dipped a bit, from 627 down to 609 crores, but the real story here is the bottom line. The profit after tax, that took a much, much steeper hit. And that kind of difference, well, it immediately makes you ask, okay, what's going on here? And to put a really sharp point on it, we're talking about a 20% drop in profit from one quarter to the very next. A number that big, well, it absolutely demands an explanation.
So what was behind that 20% drop? Well, it wasn't just one single thing. Management kept referring to it as a perfect storm, a bunch of different challenges that all kind of slammed into them in the first half of the year. And this storm had a few key ingredients. You had broad economic issues, like people just not spending as much, plus heavy rains hitting rural income. Then, inside their own industry, a big competitor collapsed, which caused a whole lot of chaos and slowed down new ATM installations. On top of all that, banks got tighter with credit, making it harder for CMS to collect their payments, all while their own internal costs were going up. It was a lot. And to make this really concrete, think about that industry churn. About 4,000 of the ATMs they manage went dark, temporarily inactive, just in this one quarter. Now, that's not just an operational headache. Management put a number on it, a 15 crore rupee hit to revenue. That single data point right there explains a huge chunk of the pressure they were feeling. So, all these challenges, as you can imagine, led to some pretty pointed questions from the analysts on the call. And, the Q&A part of these calls is often where you get the real story, because management has to go off script. One of the hot topics was something called Days Sales Outstanding, or DSO. It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. It's the average time it takes for a company to actually get paid after they've done the work. And when that number starts creeping up, it can be a major red flag for investors. And an analyst from Unify Capital went right for the jugular on this one. He saw this 10-core provision the company made for debts they might not collect, and he wasn't happy with the first few answers he got. So he kept digging, basically asking, look, just tell me, how old are these unpaid bills? And this is just a fantastic example of why analyst calls matter. At first, management gives this very standard, kind of vague corporate answer about their expected credit loss policy. But the analyst just wouldn't let it go. And finally, the real answer came out. The bills they were worried about were 6 to 9 months old. It just shows you how important that scrutiny is for getting past the jargon. Okay, but a tough quarter isn't the entire story here. Not by a long shot. Management spent a good deal of time laying out their strategy for a comeback. So let's pivot away from the problems and look at their solutions, which they've built around these 3 core growth pillars. So here it is, their path forward. First, they're going to double down on their main ATM business, basically using that industry chaos to their advantage and snagging big contracts. Second, they are pouring fuel on their tech platform, a thing called Hawkeye. And third, they're expanding their retail services, using a more nimble gig worker model, which helps them get into rural areas much more efficiently. And to back up that first pillar, the CEO, Rajiv Kaur, dropped a pretty big bombshell. They've just finalized a huge deal with SBI, the biggest bank in India. And this is no small thing. We're talking about an extra 500 crore opportunity just from this one contract over the next decade. That's a massive win and really proves they're serious about that consolidation strategy. Now for pillar number 2, the tech play. This chart really shows you their ambition for the Hawkeye platform. See, it took them 3 years to get to 100 crores in revenue. Now their target is to hit 250 crores in just the next 2 years. This is clearly a massive part of where they see the future of the company. And you might be wondering, why are they so bullish on this Hawkeye thing? Well, it's because the potential market is just enormous. Management is looking at a pipeline of over 3,000 crore rupees, and that's just from banks wanting to upgrade their security and surveillance systems. It's a gigantic pie, and CMS thinks they're in a great spot to grab a big slice of it. So we've seen the bad news and we've seen the comeback plan. But the road to recovery is never a straight line, right? So let's wrap this up with a clear-eyed look at the risks that are still very much out there. Look, a great plan is one thing, but pulling it off is another, and the risks are real. The same consumer spending slowdown could stick around. That credit crunch could keep making it hard to get paid. That massive SBI deal, well, that comes with huge execution risk. And their exciting tech business, you better believe it has fierce competition. These are all things to watch. But even with all those risks, management's final message was one of resilience. The CEO actually brought up past crises, things like demonetization and COVID, and made the point that this company has a history of not just surviving these storms, but actually using them to get stronger, leaner, and grab more market share. And that really leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? CMS has weathered a pretty nasty storm, and they've chartered a new course with a really ambitious strategy. They're trying to turn what was a messy, transitional quarter into a truly transformational year. The plan is there, but so are the hurdles. Can they actually pull it off? Well, that's the story we'll be watching.